Welcome to One Slot. I'm Felicity Ezewuike. So last week we stepped into the International Criminal Court ICC debate, questioning if Africa is a soft target for the ICC. We had as our guest Dr. David Matsanga, who said he was aggrieved with what he described as unfairness in ICC procedures and steps in applying justice in certain cases, and how this casts doubts on its credibility. A credibility he believes can only be restored if the court rules are applied equally and fairly to all. He touched on other issues, including the need for a reformation in evidence gathering and investigation of cases. You can catch the full conversation on News Central's YouTube channel. Today, however, our guest is on the same topic. He is a legal academic, versed in international criminal law. Dr. Kwaku Agyeman-Budu leads the Law Center's Faculty of Law, Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, and the African Center on Law and Ethics. He is a man with many leadership hats, including as head at the African Center of International Criminal Justice. The doctor has visited the ICC on occasions with discussions on areas of collaboration with the center and on how to root out impunity and counter the negative narrative regarding the court since its establishment. He joins me on One Slot to further expand the conversation. Welcome, Dr. Kwaku Agyeman-Budu.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, before we establish your position in this conversation, let's take a quick look. I want you to see the comments from some African leaders. After that, we will take your position.
Africa feels targeted, rightly or wrongly. It's like only African leaders are being arraigned before the ICC. And so Africa feels
with
targeted.
African support.
It is correct to say that most of our cases, or all of our cases at the moment, are in Africa. But that is not the whole picture, Tim.
The International Criminal Court, from its own record of the work that has been done since the Rome Statute was adopted, shows clearly, with no shadow of a doubt, that it is a court created for Africans, and it is used mostly by Europe to manipulate African politics. You cannot tell me...
Where does the ICC chief prosecutor come from?
Where is a white man?
Where
is the white man convicted by this court from the moment it started? Are you telling me there are no crimes in parts where people have a lighter skin? We don't believe in that court.
Should we look at the facts?
We never wanted to belong to the Rome Statute.
All right, I mean, you saw some of the thoughts expressed when it comes to the debate about the place of Africa and the relationship with the ICC. So let's establish your position. Is Africa being unfairly targeted by the ICC?
All right, so thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. And I'd like to say from the onset that I disagree with my own former president, His Excellency John Mahama, who was the first clip that you played talking about the cases, the suggestion that the ICC is unfairly targeting Africa. It's easy on the surface to make that assertion that Africa has and is being unfairly targeted by the ICC, but I believe it's more nuanced than that. And I say this because the ICC is a treaty-based organization, which means it is a voluntary organization. And under international law, states are free to either sign up or not to an international treaty. But once you do, you are bound to adhere to the dictates of the treaty in question, which then is binding on you. So to the extent that African states acceded to the Rome Statute, and the statute provides for investigations and possible prosecutions under certain circumstances for the commission of the international crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC, within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. I don't think it can be said that the ICC is unfairly targeting Africa. That notwithstanding, I can understand why it is easy to make that assertion, given the optics of the situations and cases before the ICC since it began its operations in 2002. And later on in this conversation, I believe and hope that I will have an opportunity to explain this point further, as it is more nuanced than being straightforward. But to answer your question in a nutshell, I do not think that the ICC is unfairly targeting Africa.
So where are all these complaints coming from then? If there seems to be equity in your thinking, why are they complaining?
So they're complaining because we saw a clip of the former prosecutor of the ICC, Madame Fatou Bensouda, talking about the fact that at that particular point in time that she was making that statement, all these situations or cases that were being prosecuted at the ICC emanated from Africa. So that's where that thinking comes from, that because all the cases at some point in time were cases of African origin, then the court must be directly targeting or unfairly targeting Africa. But I say it's nuanced in the sense that if you take a look at the situations, there are currently about 14 situations under investigation at the ICC. 10 of these situations are from African states. And it's interesting to know that 5 of these African situations are self-referrals. Self-referrals meaning that the African states themselves who are parties to the Rome Statute, like we already talked about, that under international law, you're free to enter into a treaty. And so these African states haven't entered into this treaty, it becomes binding on them. And under the treaty, there are 3 ways in which the ICC may be seized with jurisdiction. Either the states themselves refer a case to the ICC, or the United Nations Security Council makes a referral to the prosecutor for possible investigations, or the prosecutor uses his or her pro motu powers that he or she can, on the basis of evidence that they have, initiate some investigations. And 5 out of these 10 situations out of the overall 14 situations emanate from Africa: the DRC, Uganda, Central African Republic, Mali, and then the second Central African Republic case. So I believe it's on the basis of all these cases emanating from Africa or being from Africa origin right from the onset that led or has led to this idea that the ICC is targeting Africa. But we need to make the point that once you are a party to a treaty, you voluntarily entered into that treaty, you are bound by the dictates of that treaty. So it cannot be heard, you cannot be heard to say that something that you voluntarily signed onto and the things that can be done under that particular treaty are being done, all of a sudden you're being unfairly targeted.
Okay, but isn't it strange? I mean, you've been in the field for quite a while, that all the complaints, even if it is self-referral, is coming from Africa. Why is it that other parties to the treaty, to the statute, is not making good use of the opportunity? I mean, there are other crimes against humanity in other parts of the world outside Africa.
So currently there are, like I said, there are about 14 situations and 13 preliminary examinations. Situations are the ongoing ones that cases may have been brought under. And like I said, there are 14, 10 of them from Africa. But interestingly, there are some from outside. So there's a situation in Georgia, there's a situation in Bangladesh and Myanmar, there's a situation in Afghanistan, as well as Palestine. And if you look at the 13 preliminary examinations, a majority of these 13 are from outside Africa. There's preliminary examination going on in Colombia, the Iraq-UK situation, Palestine, the Philippines, Ukraine, I think Venezuela 1 and 2, Honduras, the Republic of Korea.
Okay, I think I get the point you're making. Just to be clear, I want to understand, are these self-referral cases or an independent investigation emanating from the ICC?
Some are the pro motu powers, like I said, the prosecutor on the basis of some evidence that he or she may have received can decide to initiate some investigation. But it's not as though it's automatic that immediately an investigation is initiated, it would lead to prosecutions and all those kinds of things. So the point that we need to make is that regardless of how the matter matters are brought before the ICC. There are procedures and processes that you must go through before cases can actually be brought and prosecutions may be brought against persons who are suspected of committing some of these atrocity crimes.
All right, we'll come to the issue of procedures and, clarity on that, because that was an issue that Dr. Matsanga raised last week when we spoke. I want to talk about funding for a bit. When we talked on this subject last week, Dr. Matsanga expressed concern about the fact that it seems the ICC is being funded by, he alleged that France, for instance, provides about 70% of the funding for the ICC. And he wondered why the ICC is not getting direct funding from the UN, because he believes that this will make the ICC malleable to political or maneuvers from politicians.
All right, so on this issue of funding, on the contributions to the court, I want to state on the record that the ICC is funded by contributions from the states parties, that's the parties that are the states that are parties to the Rome Statute, as well as by voluntary contributions from governments, international organizations, individuals, corporations, as well as other entities. So it is not correct that funding of the court is to come from the United Nations, as you say was suggested by your last guest. But that belief in itself emanates from a common misunderstanding of the relationship between the United Nations and the ICC. First and foremost, the ICC is not an organ of the United Nations organization, and people need to understand this, because many people have that mistaken belief that the ICC is an organ of the UN. It is not. If you go back to the Rome Conference that led to the establishment of the ICC in July 1998, this was one of the many debates that went on as to how to establish the ICC, whether to establish it as an organ within the United Nations or whether it should be a separate entity on its own. And at the end of the day, it was decided that the ICC should be established as a separate body from the United Nations, but still have a close working relationship with the United Nations nonetheless. That's why you see the fact that the United Nations Security Council, which is that body that has power to determine whenever there's a threat or actual breach of international peace, which they are supposed to maintain, because they're supposed to maintain international peace and security. They can refer a situation happening in any part of the world that they believe threatens the peace or is an actual breach of the peace to the ICC, and the ICC, if it falls within the jurisdiction, the crimes in question falls within the jurisdiction of the ICC prosecutor can initiate investigations in that regard. So in terms of funding, it's not to be funded by the United Nations, but from primarily voluntary contributions from the states parties concerned. And it is not also true that France is paying 70% of the ICC's budget. That is just not true. If you look at the statistics and records available, Japan is, as of now, I believe, I stand to be corrected, is the major contributor to the ICC, followed by Germany. But yes, I take the point that most of the, or a large chunk of the contributions to the ICC's operation comes from Europe, Western Europe, that is. And so that may be the reason why people may have some legitimate concerns as to the independence of the ICC, it being linked to the funding situation.
I mean, that's a whole line of conversation to explore, but because we're a bit time pressed and we need to go on a short break, we'll try and see what we can do when we come back. We'll also talk about the seeming overconcentration of power in the office of the prosecution. Okay, we'll go on this short break, and when we come back, our guest is still here. We will continue the conversation. To stay with us. Good to know you're still with us on one slot. I still have Dr. Kwaku Agyeman-Budu, and he's been sharing his perspective on the ICC debate. Are we a soft target? I mean, Africa. Okay, back to you. We will need to step down the funding conversation. You've made a bit of your position known on that. We'll just go further and look at the concentration of power? Because that's one of the concerns that was raised. He's the arresting officer, he investigates and all of that. What's your thinking on that?
So I think, once again, that's a misunderstanding of the structure of the ICC and the way its processes and procedures work. First and foremost, the ICC does not have a police wing or an arresting wing or anything of that sort. It's the states that are supposed to effect arrests. For instance, if there's a person who's suspected of having committed any of the atrocity crimes that are within the jurisdiction of the ICC. But I think we need to backtrack a little bit to put this whole conversation in context. The ICC operates on the fundamental principle of complementarity. And what this principle of complementarity means is that the ICC is not a court of first instance necessarily when it comes to these international crimes. What that means is that the states who voluntarily sign on to the Rome Statute that establishes the ICC are responsible for dealing with these international crimes, that is genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, as well as the crime of aggression, if these crimes take place within their territory, or if some person who's allegedly or who's alleged to have committed any of these crimes in some other places are found within the jurisdiction of that particular state. So the ICC only plays a complementary role to that of the national criminal jurisdictions of states parties, which means these states parties are supposed to have incorporated the Rome Statute as part of their law. So they're supposed to have criminalized genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, the crime of aggression, so they're able to actually deal with them if they are committed on their territory, for instance. So it is when these states are not, for instance, able to genuinely and willingly prosecute persons who are alleged to have committed these crimes, that then the ICC's jurisdiction can be invoked. That's why you see, for instance, that Uganda under President Yoweri Museveni in 2004 referred the issue of Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army to the International Criminal Court to investigate and prosecute, and that was actually done. So I can't say, or I can't agree to the fact that there's an overconcentration of power, because if you look at the organogram of the ICC, for instance, it's made up of different organs. So there's the presidency, there's an appeals division, a trial division, and a pre-trial division. There's also the office of the prosecutor, and there's the registry. The prosecutor only prosecutes the offenses, but before the prosecutor would even have the chance to begin actual prosecution, it has to be authorized by a pre-trial chamber, the 3 judges who make up the pre-trial chamber. So there are checks and balances in every step of the way within the organogram or within the structure of the ICC. That is not to say that it is a perfect institution, but what I want to point out that it is not entirely, or it's not correct to suggest that
the powers are concentrated in the office of the prosecutor. Okay, yes, let's move forward. I want to make reference quickly. Okay, sorry, I want to make reference quickly to your comment about Museveni. Agreed that he took the case to the ICC, but at some point he was dissatisfied with the position of the ICC on the matter and withdrew the case. Could you explain why he made a U-turn? Because if cases, you'll explain that, but just to expand the question a little, if cases are taken to the ICC by Africans who are part to the statute, and from over time they keep pulling back and complaining about the verdict that is being given by the ICC, isn't that something that the ICC should indeed scrutinize?
I mean, first and foremost, there's no art in finding the mind's construction on the face, so I can't tell what's going through the mind of President Museveni for whatever U-turn that he may have decided to do. What I can say is that once the ICC is seized of jurisdiction in a particular instance, like in a situation where you've referred a matter to the court for investigation and possible prosecution, you do not pick and choose and then turn around and say, I no longer want to the court to proceed with this particular case. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And that's why I keep on referring to the fact that once you are a state and you voluntarily sign on to an international treaty, not just the Rome Statute, but all international agreements, international treaties for that matter, you are bound by the dictates of that treaty. And I believe that this whole issue of African states, and it's not even a question of African states, it's some African heads of states being dissatisfied or putting it out there, the whole neo-colonialist agenda and all that, it emanates from the Omar al-Bashir situation. That's what
Dr. Agyeman-Budu, I mean, there is so many, the more you speak, the more I want to ask you questions, but I'm constrained with time. So I'm going to try and press it up and just ask you to speak quickly on the position of the AU in this ICC debate. There's been concerns about how sometimes it gives conflicting direction to member countries. What's your take? How can the relationship between the ICC and Africans be affected by the role that the AU will play?
So the AU should play or does play a critical role in terms of development and in terms of international developments generally that affect the African continent. The relationship with the ICC has been a bit topsy-turvy in the past few years, but it once again goes back to the Omar al-Bashir situation. This is an old debate. I think that we've probably moved on from this particular era or this particular situation whereby the this conflict or tension between the AU. You remember the whole idea of collective withdrawal,
yes,
which was a bit strange because I mean the states individually entered into the treaties to be part of the Rome Statute.
Okay, so what is their role? Because I'm really sorry, we're time pressed. What should be their role? And as you're answering that, if you can do it in, say, 1 minute, I'll be grateful. What areas do you think that the ICC might need to look at if there is to be some sense of belonging from Africans participating in that, being a part of the Rome Statute?
I think the premise of your question is fundamentally flawed in the sense that it's not a question of the role of the AU per se and Africans being involved. It's a question of re-educating the people ourselves, the Africans, because this whole issue is one of the heads of states and the AU at the heads of state level and the ICC. And because of the situation whereby we have now seen that it is possible that an international organization like the ICC can actually come after our leaders, like African leaders. And that's what I believe led to the Malabo Protocol, where it was proposed that a new African International Criminal Court will be established, which strangely, the African heads of state decide to grant themselves immunity from prosecution before this African court that's supposed to purportedly prosecute cases of international crimes happening in Africa. And who are the ones who are most likely to commit these atrocity offenses?
I really hate to do this, but I have to interject. We'll need to maybe come back to you for more on this conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwaku Agyeman-Budu, for your time and your thoughts on the subject.
Thank you for having me.
All right, in Africa, I mean, the conversation will probably continue indefinitely until we find some middle ground. The question remains, is Africa being unfairly targeted by the ICC, or are there reasons and justifications for why all of the situations currently under investigation or prosecution happen to be in Africa? These questions, like I said, will remain contentious depending on who you speak to. But one thing is clear on all sides: things cannot remain as they are. The court must indeed take actions that will begin the process of restoring some faith in our ability to disperse justice equitably. Creating an independent African court is also an option worth exploring. I want to thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. Would like to hear your thoughts on the issue. To share them with us at News Central TV using the hashtag #OneSlot. Until I see you next week, do what you can with what you have, where you are. Africa is home. Bye for now.